The desert bloom, a bargain in the dust. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now let's get to the video. The Arizona sun beat down on Elias Thatcher's small patch of struggling crops, baking the earth into a brittle, cracked crust. His hands, gnarled and calloused, moved with a practiced weariness as he tried to coax life from the unyielding soil. It had been a hard year, harder than most. The few settlers who dared to scratch a living from this unforgiving land were a stoic, solitary lot, and Elias was no exception. His cabin, a modest affair of rough-hewn timber and packed earth, stood isolated against the vast and different landscape, a testament to his stubborn perseverance. He had come west seeking a new start, a place where a man could be his own master, but the master he found was the desert itself, demanding endless tribute. He was pouring the last precious drops of water from his canteen onto a wilting corn stalk when a movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. He straightened up slowly, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung across his back. Years of frontier living had taught him caution, but what he saw made him hesitate. It wasn't a raider or a lone prospector. It was a woman. She emerged from the shimmering heat haze like a wraith, her frame impossibly thin, her clothes ragged and dust-caked. Her long, dark hair, matted with dirt, hung around a face hollowed by hunger and thirst. Her skin, the color of rich earth, spoke of Apache heritage, a fact that would typically trigger alarm in any settler. But the way she moved, a slow, staggering shuffle, spoke only of utter exhaustion. She collapsed goose yards from him, a heap of tattered cloth and frazzled bones, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias, a man whose life had been stripped down to its barest necessities, felt a halt of something he hadn't felt in years. Or perhaps it was just the stark recognition of pure, undeniable human suffering. He approached cautiously, his rifle still in hand, but lowered, observing. She was barely clinging to life. He knelt beside her, checking for injuries beyond her obvious starvation. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were wide and dark, holding a desperate, animalistic plea. He offered her his canteen. She stared at it, then at him, suspicion warring with an overwhelming need. Finally, she grasped it with trembling hands, raising it to her lips. She drank slowly at first, then greedily, the water spilling down her chin. When the canteen was empty, she returned it, her eyes still fixed on him. Then, in a voice raspy with thirst and disuse, she uttered words that would forever etch themselves into Elias's memory, a proposition as startling as it was desperate. Her English was broken, heavily accented, but understandable. "If you feed me, I'll be your wife forever," said the starving Apache woman to the farmer. Elias stared, dumbfounded. He had been alone for so long that the idea of a wife, any wife, was as alien as a river flowing uphill. In an Apache woman, the notion was preposterous, dangerous even. Yet, as he looked at her, at the raw vulnerability and the fierce, unyielding will to survive in her eyes, he felt a strange pull. This wasn't a plea for charity. It was a transaction, a desperate bargain, offered with the last vestiges of a human being's pride. He thought of his lonely cabin, the silent evenings, the endless, grinding work, without a soul to share it with. He thought of the empty spaces at his table, the unshared burdens. He had nothing to lose, truly. His life was already a barren landscape, and she had nothing but her life to offer. Forever? Elias futilely managed to ask, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. She nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible movement. "Forever, I work, I care, I give you children. If you feed me." Her gaze was unwavering. There was no coyness, no flirtation, just a brutal honesty born of extreme circumstance. Elias stood up, running a hand through his thinning hair. His logical mind screamed caution, but something else, Something deeper and older, whisper of opportunity, of connection. He didn't know her name, her past, why she was alone and starving. He didn't know if she was telling the truth, if she understood the weight of her promise. But he did know that leaving her there to die was not an option he could stomach. "All right," he said, his voice gruff, betraying none of the turmoil within him. "Come on." He helped her to her feet. She was surprisingly light, almost skeletal. He half-carried her, her arm slung over his shoulder, back to the cabin. The walk was slow, agonizing. He could feel the fever radiating from her skin, the shallow, rapid breath. He wasn't just bringing a wife home. He was bringing a dying woman, a ghost of a person, into his solitary existence. Once inside the meager cabin, he laid her gently on his cot, the only bed in the house. He set about building a fire, heating water and preparing the scant food he had. A thin broth made from dried jerky and some hardtack biscuits. As he worked, he stole glances at her. She lay still, eyes closed, but her chest rose and fell, a fragile testament to life. He brought her the broth, holding the spoon to her lips. She sipped it slowly, her eyes still closed, gathering strength. He cleaned her wounds, scrapes, bruises, and deep cracks in her feet from walking miles in the harsh terrain. He found a small, intricately beaded pouch around her neck, a worn leather thong. He hesitated, then left it there, an unspoken boundary. As the evening shadows lengthened, Elias sat by the cot, watching her sleep, or slip closer to death. The silence of the cabin, usually so familiar, now felt different, imbued with a new presence, a desperate gamble. He had taken a starving woman into his home, a woman who offered herself for sustenance. What did forever truly mean in the raw, unforgiving world of the Arizona frontier? He didn't know. But as he looked at her fragile form, a flicker of something long dormant stirred within him, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth in the vast cold emptiness of his life. The first few weeks were a delicate dance of survival and tentative trust. The woman, whose name Elias learned was Nahimana, mystic or secret, in her tongue, as she later explained, was barely strong enough to move. Elias tended to her with a gruff, practical efficiency, offering food, water, and simple care. He was a farmer, not a nurse, but the desert had taught him to be resourceful. He fed her small portions of cornmeal porridge, a staple he usually reserved for himself, and brewed bitter teas from local plants he knew had healing properties. Nahimana was a silent patient, her eyes constantly observing him, absorbing every detail of his movements, his routines. She rarely spoke, partly due to weakness, partly due to the language barrier that still loomed large between them. Her English was rudimentary, and Elias knew no Apache. Yet, they communicated through gestures, through the shared rhythms of the farm, and through the premilanas of need and provision. As Nahimana slowly regained her strength, she began to move about the cabin. Her movements were graceful, economical, even in her weakened state. She began to help, without being asked. She would sweep the dirt floor with a broom made of bundled twig, meticulously clean the few cooking utensils, and tend to the small fire. Elias would wake to the smell of coffee brewing, a small luxury she insisted on preparing. Their promise, work, was not an empty one. Once she was strong enough, she followed him out to the fields. She understood the land in a way he didn't. Her hands, though small, were surprisingly strong and knew the rhythms of the earth. She showed him how to identify edible wild plants he had overlooked, how to find deeper pockets of moisture, how to mend torn irrigation channels with local clay. She moved with an innate wisdom of the desert, a knowledge passed down through generations. It taught her about his crops, corn, beans, squash, and she learned quickly observing his methods, then subtly improving upon them. Their shared labor created a silent bond, stronger than any words. They would work from dawn till dusk, side by side, the only sounds the rustle of wind through the dry stalks and the rhythmic thud of their hooves against the resistant soil. In the evenings, they would eat the simple meals she prepared, always more flavorful than his own, and then sit by the fire, the silence between them no longer awkward, but comfortable, companionable. Elias began to observe her more closely, seeing beyond the initial shock of her appearance. Her features, once gaunt, began to fill out, revealing high cheekbones and a delicate jawline. Her eyes, once hollowed by fear and hunger, now held a deep, reflective calm. And noticed the intricate beadwork on the worn pouch she still wore around her neck, and the way her lips curved into a soft, genuine smile when she saw a hawk circling overhead. One evening, after a particularly fruitful day of harvesting, Elias managed to piece together a question, his words halting. "Your people, where are they?" Nahimana's expression clouded over, a shadow crossing her face. She looked away, towards the dying embers of the fire. Then, slowly she raised her hand and made a sweeping gesture to the west. "Gone. Sickness. Soldiers. Gone." Her voice was soft, laced with a pain that resonated deeply within Elias, who had known his own share of loss. He didn't press further. The desert held many tragedies, and some wounds were too raw to touch. She, in turn, began to ask about him, using simple English words and gestures. "Family? You?" Elias pointed to himself. "Alone, like you." He then gestured towards an empty space. "Parents gone. Brother." He didn't elaborate, but the shared understanding of solitary grief hung in the air. Their pact, born of desperation, was slowly evolving into something akin to companionship, forged in the crucible of shared loneliness. The physical intimacy they had, implicitly agreed upon in her desperate offer, remained unspoken, unaddressed. Nahimana slept on a mat near the fireplace, Elias on his cot. They were partners in labor, comrades in survival, but the wife part of the bargain felt suspended, unspoken. Elias, a man of simple needs and fewer desires, found himself respecting her unspoken boundaries. He saw the strength beneath her quiet demeanor, the resilience that had brought her to his door. He understood that her promise, made in extremis, was a desperate bid for life, not a declaration of love. Yet with each passing day, as he watched her move about his cabin, infuse his barren existence with a quiet grace, he found himself hoping that forever might indeed mean something more. One morning, Elias woke to the sound of Nahimana humming a soft, rhythmic tune. As she worked, it was an ethereal sound, mournful yet beautiful, entirely unlike anything he had ever heard. He watched her for a moment, captivated. She turned, caught his gaze, and stopped. He nodded for her to continue. She hesitated, then resumed, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. It was a moment of unexpected beauty, a glimpse into her soul, a silent offering of her culture. That day, as they worked in the fields, he found himself humming a familiar tune from his own childhood, a simple folk song. She looked at him, surprised, then a faint smile touched her lips. He hummed louder and she, in turn, hummed her own melody. Two different tunes, two different words, intertwining under the vast Arizona sky. The silence was still there, but now it was filled with the music of their merging lives, the promise of a future fragile yet tenacious, beginning to take root in the desert dust. As the seasons turned, the fragile realness of their existence was tested. The farm, nurtured by their combined efforts and Nahimana's innate understanding of the land, began to thrive. Elias had never seen his crops yield so much, his meager livestock healthier. Nahimana's touch seemed to bless everything. She could coax life from the most stubborn soil, find water where he saw only rock, and her knowledge of edible plants and medicinal herbs transformed their daily lives, adding variety and sustenance Elias had never known. Their relationship deepened. Elias learned more Apache words than he thought possible, and Nahimana's English grew remarkably fluent, albeit still with her distinctive soft accent. They talked for hours now, sharing stories of their pasts, their cultures, their dreams. Elias spoke of his family back east, of the war that had scarred him, of his yearning for a quiet life. Nahimana spoke of her tribe, of the ancient rituals, the ceremonies, the autonomy with nature, and the unspeakable sorrow of their dispersal. She told him her Apache name, Nahimana, and taught him its meaning, mystic or secret. He felt privileged, a keeper of a sacred trust. The wife, part of their bargain, had transformed, subtly but profoundly. It was no longer a transactional agreement born of desperation, but a partnership rooted in mutual respect, shared labor, and a burgeoning affection. They still slept separately, but the unspoken understanding between them was a warm, constant presence. Elias found himself thinking of her not just as his helper, but as his companion, his confidante, his partner in this isolated life. He felt a quiet joy in her presence, a contentment he hadn't known since before his great losses. She, in turn, seemed to blossom in the safety and stability he provided, her spirit, once dimmed by hardship, now shining with a quiet strength. However, the frontier was a volatile place, and their unusual arrangement did not go unnoticed. Traders and prospectors passing through sometimes stopped for water or supplies. Their stares lingered on Nahimana, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and outright hostility. Rumors spread like wildfire. Thatcher's got himself an Apache squaw. She's probably a spy for her tribe. It ain't natural. One sweltering afternoon, a group of 3 armed men, rough-looking prospectors, rode up to the cabin. Elias, working near the well, felt an immediate prickle of unease. Nahimana, tending to her small herb garden, stood straighter, her face impassive. "Well now, Elias," one of the men, a burly man with a cruel sneer, growled, dismounting. "Here you got yourself a little helper. Didn't know you were in the market for savage women." Elias stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Nahimana. "She's my wife," he stated, his voice low but firm, the word feeling both true and revolutionary on his tongue. The man scoffed. "Wife? You call that a wife? Look at her, a damn Indian. You know what folks are saying? That she's probably signaling to her people, telling them where to hit next. Might be harboring renegades right under your nose." Nahimana, though she hadn't understood every word, grasped the venom in their tone. Her hand subtly went to a small, sharp knife she kept tucked into her belt. Elias saw the movement, a flash of the warrior spirit still within her. "She's done nothing but help me make this place prosper," Elias retorted, his hand resting on the hilt of his own pistol. "She's a good woman, and she's under my protection. You best be on your way." The prospector laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Protection? From who? Her own kind? Or maybe you need protection from her, old man. Who knows what savages do in the dead of night?" He took a step towards Nahimana. Before Elias could react, Nahimana stepped out from behind him, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. She spoke in rapid Apache, her voice low and fierce, a torrent of words that Elias didn't understand, but whose intent was unmistakable. The prospector, momentarily taken aback by the sudden shift, stumbled back. "She says you speak lies," Elias translated, his eyes never leaving the man, "and that you disrespect her home, and that you should leave now before you learn the true strength of a desert woman." The prospector's face flushed with anger, but he paused. There was something in Nahimana's demeanor, a quiet ferocity that deterred him. He knew better than to push an Apache, even a lone one, too far. With a final sneer and a string of curses, the men mounted their horses and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and an unsettling silence in their wake. Elias turned to Nahimana. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her eyes still narrowed, watching the receding figures. "They speak bad words, lies." She then looked at him, a vulnerability in her eyes that pierced him. "You said wife, you protect. Always, Elias affirmed, his voice gruff, reaching out to take her hand. His fingers closed around hers, a small, strong hand that had known both suffering and fierce loyalty. This was no longer just a bargain for food. This was a partnership, a bond forged in mutual need, respect, and now a shared defense against a hostile world. The forever she had offered now felt less like a desperate plea and more like a sacred vow, one he intended to honor. The incident, though resolved, left a lingering unease. It was a reminder that their peace was fragile, constantly threatened by the prejudices and incursions of the outside world. Elias knew that if they were to truly make a life here, they would have to face more than just the desert's harshness. They would have to confront the storm on the horizon, the clash of cultures, and the brutal realities of the expanding frontier. And they knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he wouldn't face it alone. The incident with the prospectors was a harbinger of the changing times. The frontier was closing in, and with it came more settled, more soldiers, more conflict. Elias and Nahimana's farm, once an isolated haven, now felt increasingly exposed. They learned to be vigilant, to read the signs of approaching strangers, to be prepared. Their bond, however, only grew stronger under the pressure. The unspoken physical aspect of their marriage finally came to its natural conclusion. One cool evening, not with a sudden rush of passion, but with a quiet, tender understanding. After a long day of work, sitting by the fire, their hands brushed. This time, neither pulled away. Elias looked into Nahimana's eyes and saw not just respect and companionship, but a deep affection, a vulnerability mirrored in his own heart. He reached out, gently cupping her face. She leaned in his touch, her eyes closing. He kissed her, then. A soft, reverent kiss, a culmination of months of shared unspoken connection. It was not the fire of youth, but the deep, abiding warmth of two souls finding solace and love in an unlikely union. They moved to sharing Elias's cot, the small bed, suddenly feeling vast enough to hold their two worlds. The caricias she had once sought for survival were now freely given and received, acts of profound tenderness, healing old wounds in both their hearts. Nahimana, who had known the harshness of a warrior's life and the brutal realities of her tribe's dispersal, discovered a softness, a quiet joy in Elias's embrace. And Elias, a man who believed his heart had long turned to stone, found it blooming anew under the gentle touch of the woman who had offered herself for food. A few months later, Nahimana confirmed what Elias had quietly hoped. She was with child. The news brought a mix of elation and trepidation. A child would solidify their union, a true blending of their two worlds. But it also meant new vulnerability, a new reason for the outside world to scrutinize them. The delivery was difficult, but Nahimana, with her innate strength and knowledge of natural remedies, persevered. Elias, anxious and helpless, stood by her side, witnessing the miracle of birth. Their child, a healthy baby girl with Nahimana's dark eyes and Elias's determined chin, was named Sahana, patience, in Apache, a virtue they both understood well. Sahana became the center of their world. Nahimana taught her the ancient songs and stories of her people, whispering Apache lullabies as she rocked her to sleep. Elias, in turn, taught her English words and the rhythms of farm life. Their home became a vibrant blend of two cultures, a testament to their love and resilience. However, the outside pressures escalated. The U.S. Army intensified its campaigns against the remaining independent Apache bands. Soldiers occasionally rode past their farm, their presence a stark reminder of the escalating tensions. Elias knew their mixed-race family was an anomaly, an affront to many of the prevailing sentiments of the time. One day, a detachment of soldiers, led by a stern captain, arrived at their farm. They questioned Elias about Nahimana, demanding to know if she had any ties to renegade bands. Nahimana stood by Elias's side, holding Sahana, her face serene but her eyes holding a deep, ancient wisdom that unnerved the soldiers. "She is my wife," Elias stated, his voice unwavering. "She is a peaceful woman. Our child is here. We seek only to live in peace." The captain eyed the Nahimana, then the child. He saw the genuine devotion in Elias's eyes, the quiet dignity in Nahimana's stance. It was an unusual sight, a frontier farmer and an Apache woman, a family clearly rooted in something deeper than fleeting convenience. It weighed the accusations against the undeniable image of a functioning home. Finally, with a gruff warning about harboring hostiles, he ordered his men to move on. They had passed the test. For now, the encounter solidified Elias and Nahimana's rest. They understood their peace was tenuous, but it was theirs. They decided to make their farm as self-sufficient as possible. A small island of harmony in a tumultuous sea. They rarely ventured into town, preferring the solitude and safety of their home. Sahana grew, a vibrant child who moved with the grace of her mother and the quiet strength of her father. She learned to speak both Apache and English, fluidly navigating between her parents' worlds. She was a living embodiment of the forever promise, a testament to love found in the most desperate of circumstances. Nahimana, the starving Apache woman who had offered herself for food, had blossomed into a formidable woman, a loving wife and a devoted mother. She had honored her promise, not just by providing labor, but by bringing life, love, and a profound connection to Elias's barren existence. Elias, the solitary farmer, had found not just a wife, but a soulmate, a family, and a purpose that transcended mere survival. Their story was not one for the history books, but it was etched into the very soil of their desert farm. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the unexpected ways love can bloom in the harshest of conditions, and the quiet dignity of two people who chose to build a future together. One day, one harvest, one loving gesture at a time. The desert, once a symbol of their individual hardships, had become the fertile ground for their shared life, their extraordinary forever.